how would I describe myself? Well, I'm wearing a dark suit and a new tie, which is maroon with white spots on it, and I'm about 6'2". Now, I don't know whether I've been set up to be the fool on this or whether you really wanted to hear that.
No, we really do.
Is that enough description? Do you want me to go on any further?
Absolutely. No, perfect.
Okay, great. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very excited about the chance to wear this kind of, pop star outfit. I might burst into song at any point, don't be surprised. I want to thank Lizzie and Pam for inviting me this evening, and I wish Pam a speedy recovery. I'm also extremely glad to see Ingrid, who I saw only 2 days ago and is running from conference to conference at the moment, because she has so much experience and because she's done so much for both the Trust and the Alliance. I also have an ulterior motive, because if the questions are anywhere like as difficult as the one that Lord Parkinson got, you're going to be answering. I can tell you that. I might just drag out my presentation long enough so there are very few questions. I've long been a supporter of the Alliance. I've seen up close how powerful its coordination and collaboration can be in its advocacy on behalf of the sector. Now, collaboration is something I'm going to talk a lot about tonight. I think it's a hugely powerful force that we can achieve so much more when we act together and speak with a single voice. And of course, we can leverage our individual skills and expertise for the benefit of the whole sector, because that's what we all really care about in the end. The wealth of experience in this room, in this gathering of clans, if you will, is proof of that. It doesn't matter whether your day-to-day business is steam trains or stonemasonry, duckhuts, or drawbridges. We are all here because we all believe in the power of history and the importance of our shared heritage. I want to make the case today for why and how we should continue to build on this progress. How can we leverage our collective power and intelligence to do more good, to think now, think long-term, to promote conservation beyond our individual boundaries? Now, of course, like history itself, any story or talk is shaped by the experiences of the narrator. So I was invited today as chair of the National Trust to speak. I'm going to try to be as provocative as I can. These are my own thoughts. They haven't been approved. It's not official policy, and they're shaped by my wider experience. I've only been chair of the Trust for a little more than a year. My other experience has been in the third sector as chair of the RSPCA, as interim chair of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the Wildlife Trust, and Tubney Charitable Trust. And of course, as you alluded to, my professional career in academic and scientific publishing. Every different sector and organization approaches things in a different way. And I think we can always learn by looking beyond our traditional boundaries, by making new connections. Heritage is often said is about people and place, and I think it's about time. So let's start with the place we're in right now, Charterhouse, this magnificent room, this historic institution, and the beautiful Charterhouse Square, which is just outside. Now, I thought when I accepted the invitation to come here that I have a personal connection to this place, which is quite recent. Because just as the pandemic struck, I first met and got to know in an evening meeting here the other chairs in the heritage sector. Little did I know that in the immediately ensuing crisis, I would spend a lot more time with those people and get to know them a lot better. And indeed, Pam's predecessor, the late Peter Ainsworth, is somebody I worked especially closely with during this time, and I miss him. Charterhouse is remarkable in lots of ways, and I'm sure you've heard about it already, but the thing I want to focus on is the garden that sits on top of the 14th century cemetery outside, created in haste at the time for the victims of the medieval plague. It's a pocket of beauty here today, maybe not quite today, but during the spring it will emerge, because we'll see all the blossoming. You know that National Trust people are blossom fanatics, but it's a place of refuge and sanctuary for Londoners. It's not just a refuge, though, for people, but for nature as well. It may only be small, but the square forms one part of a whole network of green spaces across the city, a stepping stone for wildlife. The importance of networks, of joined-up spaces, is one that is well recognized in the environment sector. In 2010, the Lawton Review was published, a government-commissioned review into how England's wildlife and ecology could be supported in the face of climate change and other threats. And it was chaired by the eminent ecologist John Lawton. The results were damning. It concluded that England's wild sites did not represent a coherent and resilient ecological network, let alone one capable of coping with the challenges of climate change. Lawton argued that we needed to set up new principles for nature conservation, and he expressed those in the layman's terms of bigger, better, more, and more joined up. Now, Lawton may have been talking about the state of nature, and the existential threats he reported on are indeed immense. The magnitude of climate change and biodiversity loss, as we know, is sometimes almost hard to comprehend. But I think that we in the heritage sector could learn just as much from these principles to secure our coherence and resilience in the face of serious challenges along the road ahead. Bigger, better, more, and more joined up. Each of these can help guide to extend our collaboration, to think landscape scale, and to counter the disadvantages of some fragmentation and isolation. So let me start with bigger. Why do we need to think bigger? Well, in the first instance, we'll be engaging more people with heritage, which can only be a good thing. What's more, in the world of organizations, just as in the natural world, size confers certain significant benefits in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. Now, part of the way we can grow our size and heft is by working together, and I'll talk more about it in a minute. But as a sector, we can also broaden our influence by defining heritage more broadly. As Charterhouse Square demonstrates, our cultural and natural heritage are fundamentally intertwined. It's just as obvious when you visit one of the great houses in the care of the National Trust. It's a complex interplay between the house, the garden, the estate, and the landscape. Heritage doesn't stop at the ha-ha. I know someone told me somewhat poignantly just a couple of days ago, and Ingrid was there to hear it, gardens give you a front row seat to the unfolding climate drama. Now, one way that we can grow our size is to big up the sector by hooking up more with the environmental charities and NGOs, painting a clear picture for government funders that climate change is a heritage issue. I want to talk about one special place that speaks to this interrelationship. Wallington Estate in Northumberland is described on our Trust website as a place where a historical house meets rolling hills, woodlands, and a walled garden. But I can tell you it's far more than that. Wallington is at the front line of the Trust work on nature and climate. This has been boosted, I'm happy to say, by grants from the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which has been received for DEFRA by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. To date, we've already planted 75,000 new trees and 10 kilometers of hedgerows, and we've restored peat bogs there as well. This isn't even just about rolling hills and woodlands either. As part of the project, we used LiDAR to survey 57 square kilometers of the 5,500 acre estate. Laser impulses from light aircraft can create a minutely detailed map of the ground surface and reveal what is not discernible to the naked eye. So, for instance, it revealed the location of an ancient woodland, cleared in the 18th century and not replanted after that. More excitingly, I think it has uncovered farming practices from 2,000 years BC and what looks like a series of mini kind of hill forts from the Iron Age, before the Roman invasion. This technology has also helped us find the optimal areas for tree and hedgerow planting and river management with minimal disturbance of the archaeology lying under the ground. Now, it's a great example of how widening the scope of heritage can be done through an environmental landscape lens. And I know this is something Ingrid is occupied with all the time. We widen the scope perhaps further when we think of the relationship our cultural history has with landscape, with nature, with climate, and the power of stories that we can generate through these lenses. It's impossible to engage with the Lake District, I think, without thinking of historical figures like Beatrix Potter and William Wordsworth. Colleagues at the Trust delved into history books and old street maps to trace lost blossom gardens across our towns and cities. And this has inspired the creation, particularly around Birmingham, of whole new blossom gardens. Today, I think it's being published. The well-known Oxford historian Peter Frankopan is publishing his new book called The Earth Transformed. And he shows in this how social, political, and economic history has shaped and has been shaped in turn by the changes in the climate and environment of the time. He writes, for instance, that one of the key factors in the fall of Cleopatra was the massive eruption of Okmok volcano in Alaska in 43 BC, an event that can now be measured scientifically, which would also correspond and is confirmed by contemporary accounts of feeble light and reports of crop shortfalls. This produced a local crisis, that's familiar, doesn't it? That included famine, migration, inflation, land abandonment, all of which put the Egyptian ruler in a precarious position. So she turned in desperation to Mark Antony, and we know what happened then. How will future historians explain what is happening and will happen shortly in our time? Surely a big part of the story will be about changing climate, biodiversity loss, rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and their impacts on migration, food production, coastal sites, and so forth. History and the environment are interrelated, and it is in our interest to take a holistic approach. Polls have repeatedly shown that climate change and environmental damage are one of the top concerns that people have, health and the economy being, of course, the top two. We need to ensure the public understands fully that our built heritage is literally built into the natural landscape, and therefore that climate change threatens it as well. There's therefore clearly a major role for the heritage sector to play, often in sometimes unexpected areas, engaging with the nation on the bigger idea of what our heritage encompasses and what's at risk. As per Lawson's principles, though, bigger isn't enough on its own. We also need to think about being better. It's not enough for any charity to just do good. We have a moral and legal obligation to do the most good we can, to provide the most public benefit. In the absence of market forces which drive efficiencies in businesses, we have to make a conscious effort to ensure we are as effective as we can be in delivering public goods, both for the benefits of the audiences we've served now and in the future, but also to maximize the attractiveness to investors, be they public or philanthropic. COVID reminded us just how vulnerable, how fragile our ecological niche can be. Thankfully, rescue came in the form of a cultural recovery fund, but who knows whether the cavalry will come to the rescue in the future if there's another crisis. I fear we must reckon with the likelihood that government financial support for heritage and culture is rather more likely to decline than rise in real terms in coming decades, regardless of which party is in power. Public spending is coming under increasing pressure, as we all know, as governments struggle to meet the pension and healthcare costs of an aging population, while at the same time servicing this burgeoning debt itself. Economic growth will be the focus of all political parties, as far as I can tell, for the foreseeable future, as we've seen from both the government and opposition statements in recent weeks. Heritage and cultural assets will find it hard to compete for scarce resources unless we can demonstrate clearly a financial return, indirectly through the likes of better health and well-being, climate mitigation, or directly via economic growth. Meanwhile, on the private side, of course, we all know fundraising can be more competitive and more professionalized. Now, we know that investment in culture and heritage makes places more attractive to people to move to and will attract, in turn, additional investment. And that cultural resources contribute directly to social cohesion and well-being. We know communities put great value on historic assets and ties. Polling has shown that communities put investing in local heritage as one of the top priorities for leveling up. But in precisely what ways and by how much do these things matter? Where there's a clear opportunity for the sector to get better, it seems to me, is in the measurement of heritage's benefits. 10 years ago, or 10 years after the Lawton Review, came the Dasgupta Review on the Economics of Biodiversity, published by a commission and published by the Treasury at the beginning of 2021. The report, chaired by Professor Partha Dasgupta, was based around the concept of natural capital, an economic approach to modeling and quantifying the benefits ecosystems provide. DCMS is currently trying to do the same thing with cultural and heritage capital to capture all the so-called externalities, mostly benefits that investment in culture and heritage bring with it. The objective of this Culture and Heritage Capital Committee is to agree an economic approach and provide evidence for valuing our cultural heritage assets and the benefits they provide to people and businesses. Now, I'm a member of this committee, and I know a number of other people in this room are as well, and I'm sure that this evidence will be incredibly valuable in our continuing efforts to make the case for and to guide future investment in heritage and culture. It will inform our discussions with developers, government, funding bodies, financial institutions, and so forth. The other area where we can get better, and we need to get better fast, is in following our audiences into the digital realm. From CRM systems to fully immersive digital experiences, we all know this is an area that is ripe for further development, and one where we will need to improve just in order to keep up. I know this has been an area of development for DCMS and the Alliance via Heritage Digital. It's a great example of the benefits of being more connected and working together. Given the sheer pace of technological change, this work will have to accelerate, and we will need to spot the opportunities as well as the challenges represented by the likes of chatbots and their successors. Social creatures though we may be, we spend a lot of our time physically alone, but connected to the outside world via the internet. Statista says that in 2021, the average UK citizen spent 372 minutes per day connected to the internet. 240 minutes watching TV or streaming broadcasts, 108 minutes on social media, 77 minutes listening to stream broadcasts, 62 minutes at a game console, and 40 minutes listening to podcasts. Okay, that was during COVID, I admit, but even so, we are living now in two worlds, the physical and the virtual. And that virtual world will continue to grow at a prodigious rate, and the links between these two worlds will multiply. What a great opportunity for us to be bigger, better, more, and more joined up. The Smithsonian, just as a point of comparison, I looked at the 2020 annual report. It has revenues of $2.3 billion, that's a lot of revenues. It has 178 million unique visits to its website in 2020, more than 30 mobile apps, digital magazines, 18 million followers across the top 3 social media networks, 375 million YouTube visitors each year, and it has its own television station. Okay, it's a $2 billion organization, $2 billion organization, but it shows the benefits that scale and collaboration. And this is in an English-speaking market which is younger, it has to be said, but it has a shorter history than ours. About 15 years ago, while I was its chair, the Tubby Charitable Trust closed down. I hasten to add, unlike some other charities, it intended to close down from the beginning. This was not an accident. As a spend-out charity, we shifted partway through our life, our 10-year lifespan, and devoted the René funds exclusively to capacity building, to helping key organizations move to the next level of efficiency and effectiveness. I've been fortunate to have maintained contact with many of our grant recipients over the last decade and a half, and I'm convinced these capacity building grants had a greater long-term impact on our project funding. I've talked then about bigger and better, which leaves more and more joined up. None of these approaches I've mentioned are easy to realize. Some require special skills and resources to put them in action. It's a daunting prospect for an individual organization, but I think we can navigate these challenges together, aided by facilitators like the Alliance. Sharing the burden and the knowledge enables us to take more risks, to be more innovative, and to share the benefits of learning. We will definitely need more experimentation, more measurement, more rigorous analysis in future if we're to make the right decisions and make a compelling case for further investment in heritage. It's important to remind ourselves that we are not in direct competition with one another. One of the great things about the product, I can use that word, but I'm going to, we offer, if I can use that to talk about history and heritage and gardens of nature, is that the more people consume of heritage, the more they get of these delights, the more they want of them. Heritage, like education and exercise, is a kind of benevolent addiction. My personal view is that we should be searching creatively for ways to drive up demand in general by raising awareness and removing barriers, real and perceived. Why do some people think that heritage is just not their thing? Where does someone go after they visit one heritage site? They just go home. Why don't they go to another place in the nearby? How can we encourage them to visit another local attraction, seek out more information, delve deeper? How can we make heritage a part of everyone's everyday life, not a one-off destination or something they drive past on the way to the airport and a holiday abroad? Is there a saturation point where people can have too much of heritage? I don't think so. I can't say with certainty, but my suspicion is there's untapped demand out there. Economists understand that value is created by the interplay between supply and demand. Staff at one funder told me that demand creation was not their responsibility, and I asked why. Additionality, greater public benefit, can come just as much from adding to the consumption or use of heritage as to adding to its stock. I started off by remarking how much the likes of the Alliance and others have achieved bringing us together and pooling collective efforts. There is much more that we can do in this space. And then there are a few more powerful magic wands to make you better than improving skills and capacity. Specialist skills can be nurtured as much as generalist ones. The generous support of the Hamish Loxton Foundation, the National Trust, has enabled us to create more than 50 apprenticeships, things like stonemasonry, carpentry, and joinery. Now, we selfishly hope that people will stay after they've done their apprenticeship with us, but they're not going to. They're going to go back to the rest of the community, and we think that's a good thing to boost the whole sector. Given this mutual benefit, it doesn't seem unreasonable for us to be looking at joint schemes across the sector on creating more skilled people, helping people get a foot in the door into our world, and ensuring that their skills are passed on to the next generation. Similarly, research, an activity that adds to all our understanding regardless of who commissions it, who conducts it. There's already a lot of good partnership going on, some of it with academic institutions. I think we could do more on the practical side. The Trust Estate is a fantastic test bed I've discovered for new ideas due to its scale and its diversity. It's been fascinating for me to watch the discoveries we've been making over the past year, and I particularly highlight the pilot schemes we've done to learn more about how to retrofit historic buildings and install renewables in a historic environment. But there's plenty more that we could be doing on all aspects of restoration and conservation. Now, I've been speaking mostly about national links, but of course ecologies are also local phenomena, and postcodes provide a natural departing point for joining things up. One personal hypothesis I have, which needs further exploration, is about the topic of complementarity. It's an economics term where more of one thing increases the value of something else alongside it. Places that have natural and cultural capital side by side, or a number of cultural assets linked together physically, probably feed off each other in the way that restaurants clustered along a single street. The National Trust, with support from the Heritage Fund, has been working with local authorities on something called Future Parks Accelerator all across the UK, creating and restoring green and blue corridors for people in cities and towns to connect with each other and with the other resources which surround them. We know people value the green space for itself, but it doesn't take a lot of imagination to infer that we will see an increase of use of the cultural sites adjacent to these green places. And I'm sure the principle works the other way around too. So this is another reason why we need to see nature and our built heritage as part of the same picture. Do we have the right institutions, players, infrastructure in existence to help us become bigger, better, and more joined up? I want to recognize briefly what organizations like Historic England, the Heritage Fund, the Alliance have already been doing. These organizations were able to put together at speed a compelling story which persuaded the Treasury to provide an unprecedented level of financial support during the pandemic, and then they worked together with great speed and collegiality to actually deliver that relief funding. I want to single out the Heritage Fund and the Alliance for the great work they're doing on the skills level and facilitating knowledge sharing across the sector. In the aftermath of the pandemic, the Heritage Fund came forward with its Rebuilding Heritage Program. This is a free support program aimed at giving heritage organizations the tools they need to weather the cost of living crisis and its associated challenges. I want to single out English heritage, English historic, historic.
So many times.
I looked over and I told him I was going to talk about historic. Yeah. Okay, we'll scrap that. Historic England, I've long admired because they persistently try to apply economic analysis to heritage issues, from demonstrating that retrofitting historic buildings has a lower carbon footprint than rebuild, to showing that towns can get excellent economic returns from investment in high street action zones, and to providing evidence for the links between well-being and the historic environment. A central plank, if you go on their website, it says a central plank of their strategy is a commitment to ongoing research toward understanding the social and economic value of heritage. And I hope we'll all firmly get behind the Heritage Sector Resilience Plan, which is encouraging wider collaboration and information gathering and sharing, with the Historic Environment Forum acting as a facilitator. It's 5 themes: skills, strong governance, climate change, diversity and inclusion, embedding heritage in wider public policy, cover many of the areas I've touched on today and represent a clear pathway for the sector. So if there's so much good work going on, if there's so much good work being done, why am I doing my best to be provocative this evening? It's because as I said earlier, it's not enough to do good. We have to constantly strive to do more, to do better. My intention today has not been to detract from the small is beautiful ethos of our sector, but rather to hint that bigger, better, more joined up can be beautiful too, and that with enough imagination, graft, and goodwill, it should be possible for us to have the best of both worlds.